It's understood the corporation will apologise to the Match of the Day presenter. Our correspondent Ivor Bennett is outside the broadcasting house with the latest. Ivor.
Yeah, it's a very dramatic development that's just broken in the last few minutes. Sky News understands, as you say, that Gary Lineker will return to presenting duties, sport presenting duties here at the BBC. We understand that it will be the BBC who will be apologising to Gary Lineker after taking him off air on Friday. So quite the turn-up here. And this, we're waiting for official confirmation from the BBC. Nothing yet. We did expect a resolution to this issue this morning at some point, but I don't think anyone really expected this. We were thinking there'd be some sort of middle ground fudge, and of neither side having to apologise, so that neither side lost face, but it seems not. As I say, Sky News understands it'll be the BBC apologising to Gary Lineker, with him due to return to presenting duties. In fact, I can bring you the statement now from Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC. We've just had that confirmed now. It's quite a lengthy statement. Here it is. He says, everyone recognises this has been a difficult period for staff, contributors, presenters and most importantly our audiences. I apologise for this. The potential confusion caused by the grey areas of the BBC's social media guidance that was introduced in 2020 is recognised. I want to get matters resolved and our sport content back on air. Impartiality is important to the BBC. It is also important to the public. The BBC has a commitment to impartiality in its charter and a commitment to freedom of expression. That is a difficult balancing act to get right, where people are subject to different contracts and on-air positions and with different audience and social media profiles. The BBC's social media guidance is designed to help manage these sometimes difficult challenges, and I'm aware there is a need to ensure that the guidance is up to this task. It should be clear, proportionate and appropriate. It goes on. Accordingly, we are announcing a review led by an independent expert reporting to the BBC on its existing social media guidance, with a particular focus on how it applies to freelancers, outside news and current affairs. The BBC and myself are aware that Gary is in favour of such a review. Shortly, the BBC will announce who will conduct that review. Whilst this work is undertaken, the BBC's current social media guidance remains in place. And finally, he says, Gary is a valued part of the BBC and I know how much the BBC means to Gary, and I look forward to him presenting our coverage this coming weekend. So that's a statement apologising to Gary Lineker from the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie. And we've had reaction from Gary Lineker as well. The presenter saying, quite succinctly, I am glad that we have found a way forward. I support this review and look forward to getting back on air. So an about turn from the BBC from just a few days ago, when they removed Gary Lineker from presenting duties for refusing to apologise for that tweet criticising the government's language around the announcement of its small boats policy, tackling migrants crossing the Channel and arriving in the UK. They removed him from air. Now he's coming back in time for next weekend, with the BBC apologising to its highest paid presenter and announcing a review of its social media policy and impartiality policy and guidance for staff on using social media. So quite a dramatic development here at New Broadcasting House. And once again, reaction from Gary Lineker saying, I am glad that we have found a way forward. I support this review and look forward to getting back on air.
Ivor, thanks for that. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris is on the line now. Rob.
So Gary Lineker will be returning to the BBC, as we revealed a short time ago, and confirmation from the corporation that Lineker will be able to return to presenting this weekend with FA Cup coverage. He had been stood down on Friday night in an unprecedented move by the corporation, which took odds with his tweets. And Gary Lineker was determined not to apologise for his tweets, and his determination to be able to continue tweeting on political matters was at the heart of this, which did lead to the discussions and the debates over the application of the BBC's impartiality guidelines. And Gary Lineker believed, as a freelancer, he was able to post freely on matters politically, and he has just posted himself on Twitter. Gary Lineker, he said, after a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated a way through this. I want to thank you all for the incredible support, particularly my colleagues at BBC Sport for the remarkable show of solidarity. Football is a team game, but their backing was overwhelming. What Gary Lineker is referring to there is the fact so many of his BBC Sport colleagues decided they would not commentate on matches, which did lead to Match of the Day airing on Saturday night with pure ambient sound from the stadiums, with no commentary, no pundits, no presenter, and reduced from an hour and 20 minutes to just 20 minutes. As I understand it, Gary Lineker's team has been in negotiations, his agents, with the BBC all weekend, and they were unwilling to concede on his right to be able to express opinions on matters that matter to him, particularly his support for refugees, which has been well known for sort of several years. He's had refugees living with him, and he wanted to be able to have the right to continue to be able to comment on political matters. And it has brought us to a head now with the apology of form from the BBC and that review of just how freelancers will be able to post on social media.
We only have an hour for our business show.
Okay. We have apparently had a tweet from Gary Lineker. There it is. After a surreal few days, I'm delighted that we've navigated a way through this. I want to thank you all for the incredible support, particularly my colleagues at BBC. Well, you've actually just read this out, Rob. This is just Gary Lineker saying what you've just said.
He says, he's posting this in a Twitter thread, I have been presenting sport on the BBC for almost 3 decades, and I'm immeasurably proud to work with the best and fairest broadcaster in the world. I cannot wait to get back in the MOTD chair on Saturday. We'll have to wait for the next post in what he says will be a 4-tweet thread, but certainly...
Right, I think we've lost Rob Harris there. We will, of course, have comprehensive coverage of this story throughout the morning here on Sky News. But meanwhile, back to our top story now. And a crisis in the UK's tech sector was averted this morning when HSBC UK bought the UK arm of America's Silicon Valley Bank for a symbolic £1. The deal, announced by the Treasury and the Bank of England at 7 o'clock this morning, means that the deposits of the bank's 3,300 UK customers, nearly all of them tech startups, will remain safe and their banking services will remain uninterrupted. The Treasury and the bank spent most of the weekend trying to line up a buyer for SVB UK, which has some £6.7 billion worth of deposits and £5.5 billion worth of loans. Well, let's bring in our city editor, Mark Kleiman, who broke the story this morning. Mark, give me a flavour of the kind of negotiations that have been going on this weekend.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. It's been pretty evocative of the 2008 banking crisis, to be honest. I mean, where almost every weekend during that very febrile period, there was at least one bank that was in negotiations with regulators and the government about securing its financial position. In the case of Silicon Valley Bank UK, Ian, clearly this is not a household name. It's not a big high street lender like the banks we were talking about in 2008 were the likes of Royal Bank of Scotland and Lloyds. But at the same time, this was an important moment, both in terms of testing the Bank of England's resolution regime, which was introduced after that crisis of about 15 years ago, but also because of the importance of Silicon Valley Bank UK to its customer base and the wider British technology industry. Now, clearly, if customers had not been able to access their bank accounts this morning and were facing the loss of very substantial deposits as part of an insolvency process, that would have caused chaos, not just in the technology sector itself, but in its supply chain and beyond. And we saw over the weekend a letter from hundreds of technology entrepreneurs to Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, warning about the impact of Silicon Valley Bank UK's demise. And I think that did help focus the minds of those in the Treasury over the weekend. You have to say, in that the test of the Bank of England and the government's bank resolution regime has passed with flying colours, in that this deal was able to be executed and delivered before markets opened on Monday morning. And of course, HSBC, as Europe's largest lender, one of the world's biggest banks, is a safe haven for Silicon Valley Bank UK. We'll obviously have to wait and see more about what's happening in the US banking industry with concerns about a number of other banks besides Silicon Valley Bank. But for the moment, the conclusion from those who have both worked on this deal and those in the tech industry over the weekend is that it probably represents the best possible outcome for this major lender to Britain's technology sector.
Thanks, Mark. Well, joining me now for more on this is James Edsberg. He's a banking sector consultant. James, welcome to you. I mean, that's a very key point that Mark has just made, that the UK's resolution scheme has passed this test with flying colours, hasn't it, really?
Yes, it has. I mean, under the scheme, £85,000 worth per deposit or £175,000 per joint account was guaranteed. But there's a huge sigh of relief across the tech sector this morning as the deal was done over the weekend, which, as Mark has just been saying, guarantees really the future. It was an existential threat to some of our kind of brightest prospects in the UK in terms of technology and life sciences, those fast growth businesses that might well be the big companies of tomorrow. And without their ability to be able to meet payroll, to pay for office premises, all the usual cash demands that there are on startups and early stage businesses, they were looking really at a very, very serious situation. And at a stroke, HSBC has really ridden to the rescue.
James, in the US, the government said over the weekend that they were effectively backstopping SVB in the United States. All depositors would get access to their money. Why didn't the UK government go down that approach? Why did it seek to find a buyer instead for SVB UK?
Well, I think, the most natural and the best thing for a bank to be able to do when it gets into trouble, particularly one like SVB UK, where it's a standalone bank, it had an independent board of directors. Although, as your correspondent was saying a moment ago, Silicon Valley Bank sounds like it's just geographically concentrated on the west coast of California. Actually, as a global bank, it does work and has clients and customers in this tech sector right across the globe, in China, India, Israel, Scandinavia, Germany, as well as in the UK. So I think it was your first port of call if you're trying to solve this situation is to find a buyer who can swallow the whole business, continue as is, and maintain the value of that asset. In other words, the client-facing people that SVB has in the UK. Their approach, it is a specialist bank focusing on these VC-backed and early-stage companies. If you can do that and continue as best you can, business as normal, that's the best thing. That's the best thing for the bank and its customers and the sector.
James, what's in this for HSBC?
The access to a team and an approach which is focused on this part of the economy. SVB was doing things that not many other banks were doing. And if you talk to entrepreneurs, they will often say that when they go to the high street banks, they are met with quite often a quite rigid and inflexible approach to how to how they kind of their needs are met. Startups need flexibility. They need facilities. They need to be talking to someone who understands what the fundraising process is. And that skill set doesn't exist hugely in many of the high street banks. So what HSBC is getting is quite a narrow but quite a deep access to a segment in the market which is not well served. And if they look after this asset well, then, as I say, that's good news, not only for the sector, but may well be valuable for HSBC as well. That having been said, and HSBC is a huge bank. It's Europe's largest bank. It's one of the world's largest bank. And if you look at the size of SVB UK, I think they have about 5.5 billion in loans compared to over $1 trillion in loans that HSBC has. So SVB UK being taken on by HSBC is not in any way going to undermine or affect HSBC's strength.
James, what are the lessons here for regulators? And in particular, I mean, SVB's parent in the United States looked pretty well capitalised. It looked to have done everything that regulators have sought from banks post the financial crisis.
I think there are a number of lessons to be learnt there. The first thing is the suddenness with which this happened. A run on a bank now happens at lightning speed. We remember the days back in 2008, 2009 when people queued up at branches or at cash points to take their money out. These days, it's the question, even in business banking as well as in personal banking, you open an app, you complete an online request to transfer your funds, and it takes minutes to close an account. So this really was, I think, pretty much the first run on a bank of the digital age. And that gives, pause for thought, I think, for US regulators. The second thing I think is really important to emphasize, and we're seeing this morning pressure on what are called the US regional banks or mid-tier banks, is that they are not subject to the same stringent liquidity and other requirements that the world's biggest banks, the US's biggest banks, and European banks are subject to. And there is going to be questions, I think, asked about whether that stringent regime around liquidity should be extended further down the rankings of banks in the US, so that they too are subject to the same requirements. And so far that hasn't happened. But it looks like other US banks are under pressure this morning that may have been suffering from the same issues that SVB was, which was an investment in bonds, which were under pressure as a result of interest rates going up. I think the other reason why banking stocks are under pressure today is that this chapter, what's happened over the last 3 or 4 working days, puts into question this incredibly aggressive increase in interest rates that the Fed has been pursuing over the last year. It's been the fastest increase in interest rates in history. And what that's done is put under pressure any bank that is holding a large proportion of its assets in bonds. And as interest rates go up, those bond values drop. And that's what left SVB in trouble.
OK, James, we have to leave it there. Appreciate you joining me today. Thank you. Well, joining me now is Richard Adey. He's Chief Executive and co-founder of the British e-scooter manufacturer Tor. Its operations in the United States bank with SVB and had their funds frozen on Friday. Richard, welcome to you. How much money did you have on deposit with SVB in the US?
Well, earlier at the weekend when I was being interviewed, you kind of wanted to avoid it because you didn't want to become the story. But we had 375,000. We kind of knew 250 was protected, so it was a relatively small amount. I mean, we do reasonably good treasury management. But it would have been serious for us. I mean, we're a relatively small business. You can't just take a hit of 125,000. But it was pretty clear something was going to have to happen. I mean, when we went to the States, we went because we set up in the UK, and the UK promised that regulation would change on scooters. When it didn't change, we then got funded in the States, and we got funded by one of the VCs, a well-respected VC, and you get encouraged to go to SVB.
Yes.
And in fact, in the UK, I have investments where they actually, as part of the funding, they had to do it. So then you end up with 50% of the sector effectively managed. And if they didn't do something on Monday morning, there was going to be really serious harm.
And you think that arrangement was pretty commonplace throughout the United States? If you were a VC-funded tech business, you were basically pointed towards banking with SVB? Yeah,
I mean, there was a very close relationship between the venture capital and private equity sector. And SVB is not like any other bank. I mean, I think we have to be really careful here. It was so close, and I don't think this story's played out yet. We're all breathing a sigh of relief because we want a simple story, and the simple story is it was poor treasury management by SVB. That's not the whole story. The story is there's much more risky debt in there, and we were discussing how HSBC took on for £1, but they'll have to look at that loan book very carefully because very soft loans were put in as part of what SVB was doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's by no means clear what happens to the US arm of SVB at all now. I mean, all we know is that the US government's standing behind the depositors right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's tricky, isn't it? Because now they become the lender of last resort. And that changes the whole risk profile of the banks. That's not, and that's partly why the UK government hasn't resolved this issue yet. So for me, I breathe a sigh of relief. I had a business in the UK that had 8 million held. And in the US, it was a smaller amount. But it is very tricky to know how this goes forward. I mean, the UK has many problems. It has problems with its ability to raise funds in the tech sector anyway, and to have SVB go into administration. And to be honest, HSBC, we bank with HSBC in the UK. They will not provide the same service that SVB provided.
Yeah, very interesting though. Here in the UK, the majority of your banking business was not with SVB UK. It was with one of the traditional lenders.
Yeah, what happened was, when we started 3 years ago, I'd been in the States helping Tesla out, and I came back and thought, this scooter rental business is never going to work. You know, there's too much money in it, but ownership of scooters would work. And I had a relationship with HSBC already, so that's how we started. And we assumed that we would be building and selling scooters in the UK because the UK government had said 3-4 years ago that was going to happen. When it didn't happen, we went to the States. We funded out of the States. We had Trucks, which is a really well-respected micromobility VC. And they said, look, here we are, there's the money. They didn't say you have to go with SVB, but it was almost a badge of honour. You know, I found myself saying, oh, of course, in the States, we bank with SVB. So that's how that happens. So it happens partly just by momentum, but it also happens because once you do a financing deal, it wasn't the case with us, but with many others, you're forced to, as part of the deal, get SVB to do the banking. So they must have felt on Friday, you know, most of those companies, what can I do about this? I'm now caught. I can't even do my payroll. I can't do anything. And it's not even my fault.
Richard, it's been fascinating talking to you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Nice to meet you.
Some other business news stories for you now. And the life and pensions company Phoenix Group has reported a full-year operating profit of £1.245 billion on an adjusted basis for 2022. That was up 1% on 2021 and was ahead of City expectations. Well, Phoenix, which has 12 million customers across the UK, manages policies previously sold by household names such as Britannic, Pearl, Abbey Life, Scottish Provident, National Provident and Scottish Mutual. The company, which also sells new policies under the Standard Life banner, said it was expecting to close its recently announced takeover of Sun Life of Canada UK in April, and it added that it continued to assess further acquisition opportunities. The household and motor insurer Direct Line has plunged into the red as a result of spiralling motor claims costs and harsh winter weather. The insurer, which recently parted company with its chief executive, Penny James, made a pre-tax loss of £45.1 million for 2022, compared with a profit the previous year of £446 million. Well, John Greenwood, who's the acting CEO, said motor claims inflation had been 14% of where the company had expected it to be during the year. He added that 2022 had seen the highest weather event costs for more than a decade, with £149 million worth of claims, which was more than twice as much as the £73 million that Direct Line had budgeted for. He said that the largest event was December's freeze, with £95 million worth of claims following prolonged periods of sub-zero temperatures across Scotland and northwest England. I can tell you Direct Line shares are currently off by more than 6% on the session so far. Now, there's real pressure on the government to publish its semiconductor strategy, with warnings that the UK's chip manufacturers will head to the US and Asia without proper support. But this morning, there's good news from a British startup. Intrinsic Semiconductor Technologies says it's secured £7 million worth of investment. Joining me now is the Chief Executive, Mark Dickinson. Mark, welcome to you. Before we get on to that, there's an SVB angle here with you too, because I gather you were encouraged to bank with them, but you chose not to.
Good morning, Ian. Yes, absolutely. I came under pressure. I mean, there was... those in the industry see the SVB as a very important bank for startups and therefore some pressure to go and bank with them. In the end, somewhat fortunately for us, we decided to stay with a bank, a British bank, that had been one of the few banks that had taken us on board during the middle of the pandemic, which was a really hard time to open an account. So basically that loyalty sort of trumped the desire to go to a bank which is lined up specifically for startups. But I'm very grateful to the government for having brokered a deal which now means people like myself can sleep easy after a very tumultuous weekend.
No, indeed. Well, indeed. I think lots of people. Now your technology was, your intellectual property was developed at University College London. What specifically does it do?
Yes. We're a spin-out of UCL. The technology has been worked on for a long time, 10 years or so at University College London. It's a memory technology. Memory is an incredibly important part of the semiconductor infrastructure, if you like. All processors require memory, and we use it all the time. It's a $660 billion industry for the type of memory that we are working on. And basically, our memory allows in particular small and handheld battery-powered devices to become much more powerful than they are today. And one of the reasons that's important is because we want to add AI to everything. AI is booming. Most of the AI that we see today is done in the cloud. And this type of technology will allow that type of functionality to move to what we call the edge, to those things that wearables, for example, or sensors, or things which are at the edge of our network. They need lots and lots of memory. They need more memory. And we've got a very interesting and new style of memory. And
what will this funding enable you to do?
So we've just got £7 million in funding from a range of VCs, VCs that originally backed us, and Octopus Ventures, a big UK VC, of course. And that will allow us to more than double the size of our company. We're a small company, so that's not huge in numbers terms, but it also allows us to continue our development of this and take this technology to commercialization, to production status. And to do that, we need to partner with what we call research facilities that allow us to manufacture this in proper production lines. And that's very relevant to the strategy, if you like, for semiconductors that the government is going to announce.
Longer term, what are your ambitions for the business? I mean, obviously there's a big debate over the likes of Arm Holdings listing in the US rather than the UK. I mean,
yes.
You're way off thinking about an IPO, I presume.
We're off, yes, some distance away from thinking of an IPO, but that is, for us, a very real, if you like, aspiration, and one that we can hopefully achieve within 5 years or so. We have a technology which is relevant to every semiconductor device on the planet, practically. And therefore, we've got huge potential. And replicating, if you like, the ARM model, providing something which is an IP, which is licensed into a global economy, but not actually manufactured, if you like, on UK shores, designed on UK shores, is exactly what we want to do.
All right, Mark. There's loads more I wanted to ask you, but I'm afraid we're out of time. Good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, life remains tough in the hospitality sector. Just as they were getting back on their feet after the pandemic, pubs, bars and restaurants were hit as a wave of rail strikes just before Christmas wiped out lucrative festive trade. Well, today saw Nightcap, the owner of the Cocktail Club, the Adventure Bar Group and the Barrio Familia group of bars, announce record underlying earnings of £4.1 million for the 6 months to New Year's Day, up from £2.5 million in the same period a year earlier. Well, Nightcap's chief executive, Sarah Willingham, joins me now. Sarah, welcome to you. I mean, new openings clearly are proving very supportive for you.
Yeah, we're really pleased. I'm a lot less pessimistic than I was, I think, last time I spoke to you. I think that was sometime in November, and I was expecting this half of the year actually to be pretty difficult. But I'm really pleased. Our customers have held up. People are still wanting to go out. The big thing for us, more than anything, is the rail strikes. That's the one single thing that is impacting the hospitality sector more than everything else that we talk about, the increase of costs or the crunch on the consumer. It's down to the rail strikes.
Absolutely. I think in this statement you say the rail strikes cost you £1.2 million during the period. Presumably it's more since year end.
Yeah, and we have more to come as well. That's the thing. And I think the sort of deliberate targeting of the really critical days for hospitality will continue to see that the high street will really struggle if they continue to target Saturdays, Thursday this week, which means nobody goes out on a Friday, and yet hospitality, as always, continues to do as well as it possibly can, continues to pivot its business model, continues to put on more events on a Sunday or on a Wednesday to try and compensate for it. People really, really want to go out. There is the underlying demand is there. They just need to allow us to trade.
Sarah, what about this broader trend of hybrid working? I mean, there's a lot of concern about what it's doing for city centres. You don't appear to be on the receiving end of too much of that.
So what we've seen, and it really is a change in the way that people are behaving, actually, without a shadow of a doubt. So Friday is much quieter than it used to be. Saturday is huge compared to, it's almost like an amalgamation of Friday and Saturday. Thursday is the new big night out. And we even see a Tuesday, weirdly. I think that's the night that everybody goes into the office. So if people are at home on a Monday and a Friday, we're seeing Tuesday is bigger. Thursday, we put lots more events on. That tends to be a really good corporate night. Friday's really quiet. In fact, I've got friends that own a gym and they tell me that the Friday night is now the biggest night in the gym. You know, I mean, it really is a shift in trend, but Saturday is double what it used to be.
Sarah, what about inflation? How are you grappling with inflation? And do you think it's peaked yet? Do you feel it's peaked?
Well, I think, I mean, the government have been absolutely clear that that is one of their biggest targets for this year. And if they can halve the inflation, they can keep unemployment under control and not increase the interest rates anymore, I think we will see the economy come back into a stable by the end of the year. It's that, along with the train strikes, is the most important thing that we need to see. We were lucky later last year. We fixed most of our energy. We've capped our interest rates. And we've got long-term fixed contracts with our suppliers. And of course, we serve very little food with drinks. It's a very, very simple business model. So the inflation has a much smaller effect on our business than you will see on a lot of other businesses.
OK, Sarah, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Good to catch up with you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, 18 years after closing its UK stores, the beauty retailer Sephora has returned to the high street with the opening of a 6,000 square foot store in Westfield in West London. Well, Sephora closed its doors in 2005 after failing to compete with the likes of Boots and Superdrug, but it returned to the UK online only last autumn. Joining me now, Sarah Boyd, the Managing Director of Sephora UK. Sarah, welcome to you. Is this an acknowledgement that it was a mistake to pull out of the UK in the first place?
Well, what I would say is the response we've had this time has been really overwhelming. It's been incredibly moving and has far exceeded our expectations. Speaking to people in the queue, some of whom arrived at midnight the night before to wait for the opening, people had come from all over the UK, all corners of the UK and abroad, different groups of people had come with friends. There was a fantastic energy, so it was great to see the excitement.
What made you choose that location?
We, as you would expect, are looking at a number of locations, both for now and in the future, and we felt that Westfield, which is the biggest mall in Europe, and had this fantastic mix of mass market and luxury, F&B, and also entertainment, really felt like home for us. They're a fantastic partner, and we're really happy with the space that we've got. Now,
obviously, your parent company is LVMH, the world's biggest luxury goods company. Will you be selling any of their other brands?
We do have many of their other brands. All of the beauty brands are represented in the store and also online.
What's the typical customer that you're targeting here? Can one talk about it?
It's difficult to say because it's very broad. Anyone and everyone is welcome in our store and online, of course. And what we expect to do is to create an environment where everybody can have fun and be inspired and to be unapologetically themselves. So it's really very, very broad, but we go from quite young. We've had school kids in, especially over the weekend. There was lots of school kids coming in, all the way up to the very elderly and really from all backgrounds and profiles.
I mean, this is a ferociously competitive market. I mean, quite aside from Boots and Superdrug, you've got people like Harrods launching their own standalone beauty brands now.
That's correct. But I would say, and I can't speak for the competition, again, speaking to people in the queue and in store over the last few days, they're very excited and very grateful for us bringing Sephora to the UK. People know us from when they go on holiday to the US or France or Dubai, and they've been really excited by us coming back. So it's been very humbling.
Now, of course, you first put your toe back in the UK waters with an online business called Feel Unique. Did that inform this decision, or was it going to be something that happened anyway?
Well, this is essentially our third step. So quite rightly, as you say, a little over a year ago, we bought Feel Unique. And then we launched Sephora online, both with a web and app version in October last year, which was also very, very well received. So this is step 3. We're going to learn an enormous amount from this store. We've learned a lot already in the first 4 days, but there's also a recognition that we need to go further. 75% of our online orders are delivered outside of London, so we need to provide a physical environment with more proximity to our customers elsewhere in the UK, and that's what needs to happen next. So the good news is that if people are ordering online right now, 80% or over 80% of our deliveries are made the next day, so people don't have to wait too long.
You're clearly not worried about the cost of living crisis.
Well, what I would say is our single biggest brand at the moment in store is Sephora Collection. And Sephora Collection is a very, very affordable brand that is also exceptional quality. And so what we want to do with that, and also with our minis and more, which is essentially our smaller size products that we have traditionally near the tills, we want to make sure that we have something for everybody at every price point.
And what about this issue of inflation? Do you think it's peaked?
I'm not sure whether it's peaked, but what I would say is that we are working very closely with our suppliers and also with the other markets across Sephora globally to make sure that pricing is fair and competitive for our consumers, and that we do, as I mentioned before, have things for every price point across the board.
All right, Sarah, got to leave it there. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you very much.
Now, the US dollar has come under pressure this morning after the US government's decision to step in and restore investor confidence following the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. The move is seen as potentially obliging the US Federal Reserve to pause its current rate hiking policy. As you can see, sterling is up by 0.25% on the morning against the US dollar. It was up by more than 0.5% earlier on today, more or less unchanged right now against the euro. The single currency, meanwhile, also benefiting from dollar weakness. It's up 0.25% right now against the dollar. Well, on the equity markets, there was mixed trading overnight in the Asia-Pacific region. As you can see, Tokyo and Sydney both finished low. I think Mumbai, which isn't on the screen, was also in negative territory. On the plus side, there were gains in both Hong Kong and in Shanghai. Well, in Europe, stock markets are deeply in the red this morning. All of the main continental European indices quite sharply lower. Look at that, the IBEX in Madrid and the MIB in Milan off by more than 3% apiece. The DAX in Germany and the CAC 40 in France both off by 2 and 0.75%. There are some gainers this morning. Talking points include Deutsche Post, which is up some 2% in Frankfurt after striking a wages deal with the unions. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is also in negative territory, off some 2% right now in a broad-based sell-off. The leading faller is the asset manager M&G, which is off 3.75%. That's on broker comments following last week's results. All of the banks, most of the asset managers are off as uncertainty continues to hang in the air. Among the leading fallers in the FTSE this morning include Standard Chartered, Lloyds and NatWest Group. Outside the FTSE, there you go, NatWest, Standard Chartered off 5.5% now, Lloyds off 4.5%, nearly there as well. Outside the FTSE, a lot of statements issued by companies insisting they had no exposure to Silicon Valley Bank or did not expect to be affected by a possible failure of that group. All of them, though, are in negative territory. They include THG, the Hut Group, it's off by 1.5%, Moonpig, which is off 4.5%, and Naked Wines, which is 2% lower right now. As for the oil price, well, despite the weaker dollar, that has also been underwater this morning. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $81.35 a barrel. That is off 1.75% on the day. Well, joining me today is Philip Shaw. He's Chief Economist at Investec. Phil, good to see you in person as well. How much of a crisis has been averted here by SVB?
Well, we don't really know, and that's half the problem, Ian. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens when a bank goes under. During the global financial crisis, it was all about are banks safe? And here, we think that the banking system is a lot safer. It's better capitalised. There's lots of liquidity, particularly with the larger banks in the United States. The smaller banks we don't know. But one of the real issues that's come across is, well, what happens to tech companies? If the deposits have been guaranteed, but tech companies, as we know, are cash hungry. And if you've got SVB no longer lending to them and potentially the smaller banks thinking, well, we're not sure of our own positions, then that tightens financial conditions in the tech sector and could have an economy-wide impact.
Yeah, now, all of this has had an impact on the dollar, as I mentioned. I mean, the Fed has effectively backstopped SVB in the US. Why would that necessarily mean it has to put its rate rises on pause?
Well, it's really the economic uncertainty. The risk is that lending slows down or stops, particularly to one sector. That has contagion effects throughout the rest of the economy, potentially. And it means that, well, that sort of tightening is doing the Fed's job for it. So the Fed must be thinking now, well, we've got a mixed labour market report coming out of the States on Friday with a strong increase in employment, but unemployment going up, participation going up, but we've also got the uncertainty caused by the SVB situation. So now our best guess is that the Fed will probably raise rates next week, again by 0.25%. But We're not sure. And the risk is that the Fed actually says, well, we're sufficiently concerned about the uncertainty not to do anything at least this time.
Yeah, I mean, the US economy just keeps on churning out new jobs. It is quite remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the issues is that there's a very high level of vacancies, which is just under 11 million at the moment. So it may well be that the economy isn't moving particularly quickly, but you've got this overhang of demand for labour, which is being satisfied very slowly. So the economy carries on creating jobs.
Yeah, now, of course, we get the budget here in the UK this week. Obviously, the Treasury has spent all weekend looking at SVB UK by the sounds of it. Are there going to be any showstoppers? There hasn't been much pitch rolling from the Treasury as we've had on previous occasions.
Well, a cynical person might say that, we're more than a year away from a general election, so this could be a little bit of a holding pattern. The public finances are getting a little bit worse, but by nowhere near as much as the Chancellor thought back in November last year. But even so, that there isn't much room to cut taxes at this stage. So, our guess is that you'll see a couple of measures, a little bit of short-term political gain, perhaps keeping the energy price guarantee at £2,500 rather than raising it to £3,000. We all know about the fuel duty increases not happening as well. One or two other things like that, really short-term political gain, but really I think that the emphasis will be on, OK, let's shore up the public finances, maintain our credibility that we've just re-won and do something ahead of the possible election next year.
I mean, these are relatively stimulatory moves, though, things like keeping the fuel duty freeze in place, extending the energy price guarantee. How much of a headache does all that create for the Bank of England?
Well, it complicates the picture, but obviously by nowhere near as much as the so-called mini-budget that we had in September last year when the Bank of England ended up raising rates much more aggressively. I think, to's and fro's in fiscal policy are pretty well standard fare for monetary policymakers, and they'd be able to cope with it.
All right, Phil, it's lovely to see you in person again. Thanks for joining me. Well, we're going back to the Gary Lineker story now. The BBC Director General Tim Davie has been speaking during the last few minutes about the reinstatement of the presenter. Let's have a listen to what he said.
We've agreed, and I've spent time talking to Gary, and we've had lots of discussion, is that between now and when the review reports, Gary will abide by the editorial guidelines, and that's where we are.
You said this was your foundational
absolutely
issue, impartiality. This was a line in the sand. It just seems to have been a bit of disruption to Match of the Day, and you just abandoned it.
If that was just a bit of disruption to Match of the Day, then you probably weren't having the same weekend I was having. I think it was a very big moment in terms of us saying, we have to take stock here, we have to take action. We did take action, which we thought was proportionate. And as the BBC, we believe we did the right thing. I think I did the right thing. Having said that, I think you have to look at the balance here and act fairly. And, there's lots of people...
Have you been unfair to Gary Lineker then?
No, I think I've acted in the right way through this. It's always been difficult. As everyone's been saying on this affair, there's been no easy answers. It's been tough to get the balance right. But asking Gary Lineker to step aside, I think was appropriate at that moment. Then we reset and we do the things we've laid out in this agreement, which I think are right, and we go forward.
How are you so out of touch?
That was Tim Davie, the BBC Director General, speaking in the last few minutes. We'll have more on this story throughout the morning here on Sky News. Now, in his budget this week, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is promising to step up investment in carbon capture technology, often seen as one of the most effective ways of achieving net zero. But one of the main sources of CO2 in the UK is the country's old and leaky housing stock, which means UK households consume more energy than many of their continental European peers. One potential solution being touted for this is the construction of highly energy-efficient homes on production lines. Joining me now is Jordan Rosenhaus. He's founder and chief executive of the modular house builder Top Hat. Jordan, welcome to you. I mean, you're opening, I think, Europe's biggest modular housing factory. What's the start for production?
Well, good morning, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here. I know it's a very busy day. Start of production is next year, where it's going to be 650,000 feet, and it'll be producing up to 5,000 units a year.
And you're claiming, yeah, and it's a home an hour, basically. What's the typical cost?
Typical cost should be no more than a traditionally built house. Right now, we can compete with all the traditional house builders, and over time, our cost basis should go down. And as we've seen in construction, that's not the case elsewhere.
How difficult is it to get these houses onto to actually the locations where they're going to be based, given the UK's road network?
Not difficult at all. We haven't had an issue to date. We think that as long as you're within the guidelines, there shouldn't be an issue at all.
Right. And how much construction actually takes place on the site itself, and how much in the factory?
So we strive to do over 95% in the factory. So there should be very little time on site. When there is construction on site, things generally go wrong. So we do as much as we can in a controlled environment.
And are these properties for rent or for outright purchase?
We look to hit all tenure. So we could be for build to rent, social housing, private sale. We like to hit all aspects of the market.
And how typically energy efficient will these properties be compared with the existing housing stock in the UK?
Very energy efficient. So first, there's a lot less carbon in the build, in the actual build. And then to operate the houses, because we can control the tightness of the house with precision engineering in the factory, there's less leaky houses.
So how are the houses warmed, if you like, and powered?
Right now, we use air source heat pumps and all best practice standard stuff. But I think the key and the differentiator between Top Hat and traditional is what happens once you're heating the house. So it takes a lot less energy to heat one of our homes versus a traditional house.
Well, this is it. And presumably because heat pumps come as standard, that is much more cheap, I presume, than retrofitting an existing home with a heat pump.
Absolutely, because when you retrofit a home with a heat pump, you still have the issue with the leaky insulation and the leaky house in general.
What about the building materials? How much CO2 are you taking out of the process there?
So we can build one Top Hat home for 1/27th the carbon of a traditional brick and mortar home.
Wow, how do you do that?
We use timber frame, we use different kind of facades. Everywhere we can, we strip back on carbon.
So there's no use of bricks then, for example?
We don't use bricks. We use our own brick-like system that we've developed in-house.
Oh, so what are they made of?
They're made of a resin. It looks just like brick. You can do any kind of design that you like, any kind of vernacular. They perform just as well, even better. So that's a big way that we can cut back on carbon.
Now, prefabricated housing in this country has a bit of a patchy record, given the quality of the prefabs that were put up after the war. How will you overcome those perceptions?
Well, in general, manufacturing in all industries has gotten a lot better. So with housing, it's no different. If you use current manufacturer modern practices, you could get a lot of design variation, and you can get a lot more quality control. Definitely more than you can get on site, and much more so than you could have in the 50s prefab. And I think people are starting to recognize that.
OK, well, that's mentioned. We've got a budget coming up this Wednesday. What's top of your wish list from the Chancellor?
I think right now, with all the talk about energy, I think that we need to ask ourselves, why aren't we building homes that, rather than having to have an energy cap, why not build homes that actually have an energy surplus so that they can feed energy to the rest of the community? And I think we're right there being able to do it currently. And I think if with a little innovation and policy, we can get there.
All right, Jordan, good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
And a reminder that Sky News will be bringing you full coverage of the Chancellor's spring budget announcement on Wednesday here on Ian King Live, of course, at 10 o'clock, and then in a special programme from Westminster at 11. You don't want to miss that. Well, still to come here on Ian King Live, the science behind beauty technology. Don't go away.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Well, there's a real sense now that people are beginning to expect that this whole airlift is coming to an end, and they're really, really desperate.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people and putting them into trucks.
You either live and recover, or you die.
Okay, so that's like a war.
That's the war, yes.
We help you understand the world with us. Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
To take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster that's just landed in between us.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
It's out of control, but the head withdrawn. It's so hot.
Global insight, made local. Invest in your future. Sky News Financial Reports, sponsored by Interactive Investor. Invest in your future. Sky News Financial Reports, sponsored by Interactive Investor.
Welcome back. Now, it's been more than 20 years since GHD launched its first hair straighteners, first supplying salons and then the general public. Since then, the brand has become so successful that GHD is now synonymous with hair straighteners. Joining me now is the Chief Executive of GHD, Jerome Timmerman. Jerome, welcome to you. You've just got a new product out, which I gather has a lot of science underpinning it.
Oh, yeah. We just launched it the 1st of February. And it has been 9 years of development. So first of all, it's now 20 years, as you said, that GHD is in the tech beauty related to hair focus. So 185 degrees, what we call, is the perfect styling temperature with healthy hair. Now the next step for us is the hot air styler called Duet, which also combines airflow with heat. That gives that first in the world styler with no damage. So we are extremely proud of that.
So how many physicists and material scientists do you employ?
We have more than 100 in Cambridge, talented people working day in, day out with the transformation of heat and air and hair. And after that, of course, we are also very fortunate to tap in to the bigger hub that Cambridge has. There's a lot of tech capability, as you know, in Cambridge, which helps us and allows us to get this breakthrough innovation going.
So without getting too technical on me, it's all about getting the optimum temperature at which to both dry hair and style it at the same time.
Exactly. That 185 degrees, which is very important. And it's also the software that and the algorithms that we have in our tools that can change 250 times per second to get that optimum 185 degrees together with air. And that's one of the tech. That's why I keep on calling it beauty tech, because there's a lot of complexity into a hairstyler.
Obviously, the intellectual property has been developed here in the UK. Where is it actually being manufactured, the straightener?
The straighteners are manufactured in different parts of the world, so we are manufacturing also in Asia. But as you said, all the intellectual property is here in the UK, is in Cambridge, where on a day-to-day basis more than 100 engineers are working on this perfect and beautiful company.
And that's where the economic value is really created. It's in the IP, it's not in the manufacturing.
Oh, completely. Completely. It's all about the technical engineering and our investment in R&D in Cambridge. We doubled our investment in the last 4 years, and we will double our investment in the years to come.
Right, so what are the next conundrums that you're trying to crack, as it were?
Well, it is. I certainly think that styling without a cord is one of the things that we want to do. And I think the more and more artificial intelligence and the smart technology of our plates will advance in the future. So the more we can create added value for the consumer, the more we will do.
So there's an element of energy efficiency in all of this as well. It's trying to decarbonise the process to an extent.
Yes, sustainability is in the core of our existence. So the example of the new Duet style, it has 45% less energy use than an average tool in the market. So this is when we develop our products. One of the key priorities we have moving forward is our sustainability footprint.
All right, so there are more people going to be hired by you in this country then?
Yes, of course. We will continue to create products that create added value for the UK, but also for the global footprint we have. We are more present in more than 30 countries around the world already.
Absolutely. So where are you seeing demand growing most strongly right now?
We still see, and that's also surprising, we see demands very strong growing still in Europe. But after that, I think the US market and the Chinese market for us are very strategical in terms of growth moving forward. We want a good hair day to travel the world.
Now, you're part of Weller Group, which is owned by private equity. What's the longer-term scenario? Is an IPO likely at some point?
Well, that's all exciting stuff. I think where we focus on is growing the business of GAZ around the world. But also to say, we as a company, we work according to public standards, financial reporting, ESG, footprint related stuff. So we focus on doing our business, and that's what we do today.
All right, Jerome, we've got to leave it there. It's great to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've got a bit of reaction to this unfolding saga involving Gary Lineker. Lucy Powell, who is Labour's Shadow Cultural Secretary, has just responded to the BBC's announcement of an agreement with the sports presenter, said this is welcome and we will all be pleased to see Gary Lineker and football coverage back on the BBC this weekend. A review of the BBC's social media guidelines is clearly needed, but much bigger questions remain about the impartiality and independence of the BBC from government pressures. Well, that's it from me today. There's much more on the Sky News mobile app and on the website with reporting, video content and analysis from our business team. Plenty more on the saga of Silicon Valley Bank going up throughout the day.